My name is Epaminondas, and in my 72 years of life, I have seen many things that defy reason. As a pastor, I have learned to seek comfort in faith when faced with the inexplicable. But in 1958, I witnessed something that still intrigues me deeply. The story I'm about to tell is without fantasy or exaggeration. It is a faithful account of the events I witnessed and heard from an ordinary family in Long Beach Island, New York. The poltergeist case began with small incidents. Bottles opening by themselves, liquids spilling, strange noises throughout the house. What initially seemed like an isolated event soon escalated into a mystery that attracted scientists, police, clergy, and even the national media. Unexplained phenomena occurred in front of reliable witnesses, including police and experts. Despite all the investigations, no one was able to find a logical or scientific explanation for what occurred. Today, when I look back on the case, I see that it was not just a curiosity, but a reminder that there are things beyond our understanding. This story, which occurred in 1958, is one of the greatest supernatural mysteries of our time, and I still carry the lessons it taught me. It was 1958, and everything seemed normal in the Herman household, a simple family living in the quiet suburb of Long Beach Island, New York. James Herman, a hard-working man, his wife Lucille, and their two children, 13-year-old Lucille and 12-year-old Jimmy, lead an ordinary life, like many families of the time. The house was typical, built only a few years earlier, with modest bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a basement divided into a laundry room and a playroom. On February 3rd of that year, something strange happened. Lucille, the mother, was at home waiting for her children to return from school when she heard noises throughout the house. Upon investigating, they found several bottles with their lids open, their liquids spilled. There were bottles of cleaning products in the basement, bottles of medicine in the bathroom, and even a bottle of holy water in the master bedroom. All of this happened without anyone having touched them. When James came home from work that night, he tried to come up with a rational explanation. He considered chemical reactions, internal pressure in the bottles, or even changes in temperature, but none of these hypotheses seemed to support what Lucille had described. That night, they decided to treat the incident as something curious but harmless. The family went about their daily lives as normal, but 2 days later it all started again. This time, more bottles were mysteriously opened, and the characteristics became impossible to ignore. James began to observe everything more closely, looking for signs of the children playing or even intruders, but nothing made sense. That's when the case began to gain complexity, and the mystery of the Herman house began to take shape. When the events continued to repeat themselves, James decided to seek help. He initially called the police, who sent an officer to investigate. However, the officer witnessed the phenomena with his own eyes. Bottle caps popping off by themselves, liquids spilling. Skepticism gave way to bewilderment, and the case began to involve more people, each trying to understand what was happening in that seemingly ordinary house. As a pastor, I learned of the situation when it had already gained community and soon national attention. I felt I could offer some spiritual comfort, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. What had begun as an isolated incident was becoming one of the greatest supernatural mysteries I have ever witnessed. The phenomena at the Herman house did not stop. On the contrary, they intensified, and with each passing day, more people witnessed the unexplained events. Soon, it was not only the family that was involved, but also police, scientists, and even journalists, all trying to understand what was happening at the Longhouse Island. At first, James Herman tried to solve the problem himself. He believed that perhaps his children, Lucille and Jimmy, were playing a prank on him, especially Jimmy, who was fascinated by science and experiments. For days, James watched the boy closely, hoping to catch him in the act. But the events continued to occur even when Jimmy was away from the objects. This eliminated any suspicion that it was a childish prank. The police were called again, and this time, Officer James Hodd was sent to investigate. He arrived skeptical, but quickly changed his mind when he saw with his own eyes bottles popping open in mid-air and caps popping off by themselves. His bewilderment was enough for the case to be escalated to Detective Joseph Tosi, who began a more thorough investigation. Tosi took the case seriously from the beginning. He considered all the possibilities. Could it be a natural occurrence? An elaborate hoax? Could someone outside the house be causing the events? With his experience, he knew he needed concrete evidence before drawing conclusions. But like the others, he too witnessed events that he could not explain. Meanwhile, the situation inside the house became increasingly disconcerting. Objects began to move on their own. A porcelain statue was thrown from a table, traveling nearly 3 feet and falling to the floor without breaking. Books fell from shelves, and bottles continued to explode, seemingly accidentally. These experiences were not only frightening, but also began to interfere with the family's daily life. The Hermans, devout Catholics, decided to seek spiritual help. They called Father William MacLeod, who sprinkled holy water throughout the house. Despite the temporary relief this brought, the events did not stop. The family began to feel that they were facing something beyond any ordinary explanation. Meanwhile, the media began covering the case, attracting curious people and experts from various fields. Scientists from Brookhaven National Laboratory visited the house and suggested that magnetic or underground currents could be causing the interference. However, geological studies ruled out these theories. Even the Air Force was consulted, but it was found that sonic booms from airplanes did not cause the disturbances. The case caught the attention of researchers at Duke University, who are known for their studies in parapsychology. They hypothesized that the events could be caused by psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with one's mind. This theory was supported by the fact that Jimmy was present for almost all of the recorded events. However, the boy seemed just as frightened as the rest of the family, and no one believed that he was causing them consciously. As the days went by, the effects became more intense and violent. Heavier objects, such as furniture and even a 100-pound bronze statue, began to move inexplicably. During one of the investigations, Detective Tosi was hit by this bronze statue that flew through the basement as he was coming down the stairs with Jimmy. There was no one around, and the incident left everyone even more perplexed. Tosi, a skeptic by nature, admitted that he was dealing with something out of the ordinary. He checked every detail of the house, but nothing explained how such heavy objects could move on their own. The emotional toll on the family was clear. Lucille, the mother, began to avoid being home alone, and the children were visibly shaken. James tried to remain calm, but the accumulation of events was wearing thin. Still, they welcomed experts and curious people, hoping that someone might find an answer. Meanwhile, media attention grew. Reporters surrounded the house daily, and the case made headlines in magazines such as Time and Life. The exposure brought an avalanche of bizarre theories. Some letters suggested that the events were caused by extraterrestrials, while others spoke of the spirits of ancient Indian chiefs. Despite this, the Herman family found themselves receptive to any opinion, no matter how crazy it seemed. The phenomena reached their peak when objects were thrown even more violently. A bottle of ink, opened by itself, flew through the air and splashed its contents against the wall. A globe was pushed down the hallway at high speed, startling everyone present. Even Father MacLeod, who had returned to attempt another spiritual intervention, admitted that he no longer knew what to do. However, the case was not just about appearances. It revealed a larger conflict between skepticism and belief, science and spirituality. Scientific investigations yielded hypotheses, but none of them were conclusive. At the same time, spiritual explanations offered no definitive comfort either. The Herman home became a focal point for debates about the unknown. But for the family, what mattered was that the phenomena stopped. It was in late February 1958 that the phenomena at the Herman house reached a breaking point. The violence and intensity of the events left the family and investigators stunned. On one particularly memorable night, Jimmy was in his bedroom doing his homework when something impossible to ignore happened. His record player began to move on its own, sliding more than 4 meters across the room. Before anyone could react, a small statue of the Virgin Mary was thrown with force against a mirror in the master bedroom, shattering the glass. At the same time, in the basement, a bookcase full of books fell over by itself, spilling encyclopedias across the floor. The scene was chaotic. James Herman, the father, ran to the basement, but found nothing that explained how this could have happened. Events were becoming increasingly unpredictable and dangerous. On another occasion, a heavy bronze statue was thrown toward Detective Tosi while he was investigating the house. Tosi, a man accustomed to dealing with extreme situations, was visibly shaken. He admitted that he had never seen anything like it in his entire career. The officer inspected the basement, walls and ceiling, looking for wires or devices that could have caused the objects to move. None were found. The climax of the events occurred in early March. A jar of paint, which was on a shelf opened by itself, was thrown into the air and splashed its contents against the wall, creating stains that were not deliberate. Shortly after, a sugar bowl was thrown from the table and shattered into pieces, frightening everyone present. Even with Detective Tosi and other observers inside the house, the events continued unabated. By this time, even Duke University researchers specializing in parapsychology were on site to observe. They were paying close attention to Jimmy's behavior, as he was often nearby during the events, but seemed just as preoccupied as everyone else. They suggested that the phenomena could be a case of unconscious psychokinesis, something that Jimmy was unknowingly triggering. Despite this intriguing theory, there was not enough evidence to confirm it. The events culminated in an incident that was broadcast live on television. A porcelain figurine was thrown from a table, swinging more than 10 feet and leaving a visible dent in a wooden piece of furniture. Millions of people watched in amazement as the mystery of the Herman house unfolded before their eyes. This broadcast solidified the case as one of the most documented supernatural events in modern history. At the height of the chaos, James Herman made a decision. He asked to have his family removed from the house, even if only temporarily. He arranged for Lucille and the children to stay with his parents, while he, along with Detective Tosi, remained in the house to monitor the phenomena. Interestingly, during the family's absence, the events stopped. It seemed that without the Hermans present, the house was silent. However, when the family returned a few days later, the same events happened again, as if something had been waiting for them. This time, objects began to move in plain sight. A globe rolled down the hallway, a heavy piece of furniture was moved, and an entire bookcase suddenly fell into the basement. Jimmy seemed increasingly terrified, but no one could come up with a definitive explanation. The behavior of the events also changed. Previously limited to opening bottles and knocking over objects, they were now deliberate and sometimes even violent. Sounds of knocking on walls began to be heard, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. Despite this, no clear message emerged, only the family's growing desperation. Around March 10th, after weeks of terror, the case reached a breaking point. One night, while the entire family was gathered together, a vase was thrown from a shelf in the dining room, shattering on the floor. Soon after, a shelf in the basement was knocked over again. This event seemed to end the cycle of events, for after that night, the house fell into an eerie and unsettling silence. Herman House left everyone puzzled. The phenomena simply ceased without warning, as abruptly as they had begun. The last recorded event was the fall of a bookcase in the basement and the throwing of a vase in the dining room. But after that, the house finally seemed peaceful. The Herman family was relieved, but also deeply scarred by the experience. James Herman, ever the practical man, stated that he no longer cared about the reasons behind the events. He was just grateful that it was all over. Lucille, his wife, shared the same sentiment, although she continued to wonder what exactly had happened in their home. The investigator, however, was not ready to close the case. Scientists, parapsychologists, and curious people continued to visit the house even after the events had ended, trying to find clues or explanations for what they had witnessed. Detective Joseph Tosi, who had been involved from the beginning, compiled an extensive report but admitted that there were no concrete answers. For him, the case remained an unexplained mystery. Duke University researchers, experts in parapsychology, reviewed all the reports and maintained the psychokinesis hypothesis, suggesting that Jimmy could have been an unwitting agent. However, this theory was never proven, and Jimmy himself seemed as disconcerted as the rest of the family. Other theories, including magnetic fields, seismic vibrations, and even elaborate hoaxes, were dismissed for lack of evidence. For the Hermans, the Popper case was something they wanted to leave behind. The media attention, which initially brought curiosity and support, soon became a burden. Journalists and curious people still searched the house for weeks after the events ended, seeking answers to a mystery that neither science nor religion could solve. Over the years, the Popper case has become a landmark in the study of paranormal phenomena. It has been extensively documented in magazines such as Time and Life, and to this day is reported as one of the best documented poltergeist cases.